I'm going to start
How
recording right now.
sounds good.
Welcome.
I love it. I love it. You ready to dive into things?
I am. So let's just start talking about what got you into competitive swimming.
It's always a favorite question of mine.
It's a good start
So
point.
yeah, I mean, it's funny. So my dad swam in college. He was a swim coach my whole life, and you would think like naturally I would be pushed right into the sport right away. But my mom was very like protective of like, hey, like let's let Cory be his own person. Like we're not gonna have him swim just to be like my dad. And it wasn't until I was actually 4 years old I had a near drowning experience where
Oh
I
my
was
God.
playing around at the pool prior to it opening, and there was a pool vacuum pole hanging in the I think it was like 14 feet of water, and I decided it would be a good idea to climb this pole. Well, as soon as I climb, the pole slides under, and all of a sudden I'm 4 years old and 14 feet of water trying to navigate. How the heck do I swim? Like, what is going on? My dad saved me. Thankfully, I had no fear of the water after that, but that turned my mom into like, hey, maybe we should let Cory like become a swimmer and like let's put him in swim lessons and let him learn. And it's funny because the rest is just history. I love the water ever since that moment and have been drawn to it. And even now, over 20 years later, it's like I still feel the most peace when I'm in water or near water. So I think it was just meant to be.
So then what was the process of getting recruited to swim in college like? I mean, did you go to a certain meet that they were scouting at, or like how did the University of Delaware get to you?
Yeah. It's a unique process. So similar to like other sports, college coaches come to bigger meets across the country. One of which is Junior Nationals down in Orlando. I was fortunate to have qualified for that my sophomore year of high school. So I was on some people's radar. My recruiting process was not like a lot like I expected it. I expected June 1st hits, which is the date that college coaches are allowed to talk to you. And I was like, cool, my phone's gonna be blowing up. I'm gonna have so many emails. I'm gonna be able to choose from whatever school I want to go to. That day came and went, and I had one phone call from a D3 school. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what is going on here? This is not what I expected. So I went back to the drawing board and had a really good summer meet that year and got some more attention. But ironically enough, I had reached out to Delaware because my roommate that I live with now was going on a trip there anyway. And he said, hey, like, why don't you just come with me? And I was like, oh, shoot. Okay. I'll shoot the coach an email. He saw my times. He was like, we didn't think you would be interested in us, but yeah, we'd love to have you. It's like, all right. So went on my recruiting trip and absolutely fell in love with the environment, fell in love with the coaching staff. They were just super supportive of me and kind of who I was as a swimmer. I was a distance swimmer, which in college swimming doesn't usually carry a lot of like weight to it because I didn't have the versatility of being able to go on to relays, a lot of relays and score points for the team that way. I was more just, hey, I could benefit the team in my three individual events, and it's kind of about it. So from a recruiting standpoint, it's definitely favors the sprinters a little bit. So I had to kind of fight my way for some scholarship dollars, but we made it all work.
So what is the difference between those who swim to relay and those who swim to go a certain distance?
Yeah, so relays are more you're with three other people on your team, and I mean, you each swim a leg, and each leg is usually relatively short. It's either a 50, 100. And fortunately, towards my later years, I found myself on the 800 free relay, which was 200 yards per person. That was the sprint, quote unquote, that I could do.
So then you get to the University of Delaware, and what turns you toward performance coaching? I mean, was there anything while you were there and classes that you took that really opened your mind to continuing to work in the sport atmosphere?
Yeah, no, definitely. I majored in exercise science with a concentration in biomechanics, but then I also picked up a few minors in coaching science and strength and conditioning. So having the interest in, honestly, just I wanted to learn quite selfishly, like how I could maximize my own performance. And it was super cool going from class and I'm learning about heart rate variability or like motor skill development. And then I'm going into swim practice and it's like all of a sudden it's this opportunity for me to just like play around and be like, oh, okay, like this is what it means to when my professor was talking about this. Like I can actually feel it. So I think that really benefited me on both sides of things. Like I was a better student because of it, but I also was a lot better swimmer because I was just so much more in tune with what was physically going on in my body. And then honestly, it just became, it made sense for me to get into it, even though I took a bunch of different career paths first. It wasn't until I realized, like, what am I really, really curious about? What I really enjoy doing? Like, how can I blend the two together? And that's how I kind of mistakenly landed on performance coaching. I was like, wait a second, I've always had this innate desire to perform better myself. Like, why don't I help coach other people to do the same? And it looks different for everyone that I work with, which is super cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a lecture and then a lab. So you're
Yeah.
learning about all of this stuff, and then you're going to swim practice and you're putting it into use.
And that's exactly how I coach the people. Like, I'm big on embodiment of certain things. Like, it's one thing to just say you're grateful for something or just write it down. I'm big on like, let's lecture, quote unquote. I'll use that very lightly. Like I don't ever like to feel like I'm talking to someone. Like I want it to be a conversation that I'm working with. But we'll speak on gratitude and then we'll roll through a workout or an activity where they're already primed neurologically because we just talked about this emotion. So it's no wonder that when they're going through this workout or exercise that they feel this deeper sense of appreciation and gratitude for what their body can do. And being a performance coach in the former athlete space, I think that's huge because I mean, I know I lost that touch when I was out of swimming at first. Like I totally lost sight of what my body could do. I was more focused on, well, crap, I can't swim a best time anymore. Like life kind of is not as exciting as it used to be. And all of a sudden, I was able to shift this perspective and start celebrating. Like, wow, my body can run a marathon if I want to, and I only have to train like a few weeks to go do it. Where most people, they hear that and they're like, that's insane. Like that would never be the case. But I started to shift that focus and it was amazing that once I did that, the excitement in my day-to-day life exploded. And all of a sudden I had this deeper sense of appreciation and gratitude for just very little things that honestly I was taking for granted for way too long.
So let's talk about that birthday marathon that you ran. Because when I saw it on Instagram, I was just shocked that you would wake up and just say, I'm 26 now, let's go run 26 miles. Like, what was the thought process behind training for that and then timing it out so it happened on your birthday? And then,
Yeah.
how did you get your friends to run with you and like support you at the different mile markers?
They're just great friends. What can I say? I'm very fortunate that I surround myself with very cool people that are willing to support me there. But yeah, I think the backstory there. So it actually dates back to very early quarantine, like March 2020. A friend of mine invited me to go to a virtual 5K, and I always give him um, some credit. I'm like, dude, I think you were the first to do like a virtual race. Like he organized 80 people on Zoom, like end of March, to do a virtual 5K wherever they were in the world. And that was the first time I had ran over a mile, and I couldn't tell you how long, like a long time, definitely multiple years. And I was like, hey, this is kind of a cool new like forte. Like gyms are closed. I might as well just get into running. So the next weekend I did a 10K and then I did a half marathon. And then when I did the half, I had this thought in my head. It was like, well, how crazy would it be if I just did a marathon? Because the half wasn't that bad in my eyes.
I
So I
that is
signed up.
never my thought process.
Yeah, it's unique, right? So I did it Memorial Day last year for the first time, and it was brutal. The friends that I had planned to go run it or support me throughout and like check in and give me nutrition bailed because it was raining at the start. And I was like, really, guys, you're going to make me now go run this like by myself in the rain? And they're like, we'll see you at the finish line. So it was a great experience. I learned a ton. It was very, very hard. And I was signed up to do another different kind of competition called High Rocks April 10th, which was 4 days after my birthday. This year, it was supposed to be local in LA, and that got pushed in, I think I found that out late February. So when that got pushed, I was like, well, I was really looking forward to training for something. And I thought back, I was like, well, I really wasn't happy with my time the last marathon. I walked a lot of the last like 6 miles. If I just run the whole thing, I'm like guaranteed a PR. Like that excited me. So I just called up a friend of mine who's a run coach and I go, hey, is it completely crazy if I just try to run a marathon in 6 weeks? And I had a better training base this go around. She was like, no, I think you could do it. I was like, all right, cool. So put it on the calendar, called a nonprofit locally out here in LA, and I said, hey, like I'm gonna be running 26 miles for my 26th birthday. Um, do you mind if I raise money for you? They were like, yeah, like no question. So I did the same thing for another nonprofit the first go round. I found like when I'm pushing myself into that really deep unknown of like this sucks, this is gonna be really hard, it helps to be tied to a bigger purpose. So I intentionally tie it into a nonprofit or a cause that I really care about and want to give back to. So that was kind of the process behind it all.
That's awesome. What charity was it?
This one was Athlete's Soul. So they are a nonprofit based locally that they help current and former athletes actually with funding to hire coaches like myself. So for someone that would be out there that would benefit from some sort of service that is geared towards the athletic community, but might not have the means to make it happen, go check out Athlete Soul because they're a great organization and they really want to just help people get the resources and the help that they deserve. And they don't think, and I agree with them, like money shouldn't be a barrier to you reaching like whatever you want to go do.
So is the work that you're doing more on the mindset side or the physical side? Because it sounds like you're kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot between the two. I love helping other people understand like their passion, their purpose, and giving them structure to go chase it and make it happen and make it a reality to wherever they're at right now in their life. But I also, with working with the former athlete population, like I've realized it myself, when my physical body isn't in good shape and I can move the way that I want to move and feel good physically, like there's going to be a mental disconnect as well. So if we have to address both. I'm a firm believer that we have to address both. And that's why I'm always going to be incorporating some sort of movement. And I mean, think of the hormones and the endorphins that you get just when you move your body and you sweat and you feel good and you connect with other people. Like that's really fulfillment and what I'm after with people is just helping them feel more fulfilled, helping them feel more connected to themselves, but also to the people that they're surrounded with. Because I think life's better that way.
So what is your client demo? I mean,
Yeah,
there are former athletes, but is there a specific sport that you get a lot of? Is there a certain age that you get a lot of? And what is the role that athlete identity plays in that demographic that comes to you?
yeah, I think primarily, obviously, I relate to swimmers the best, and a lot of Olympic sport background people, just because there's so much similarities there. I'm able to reach other sports, but definitely in the Olympic sport realm of things. Then, as far as age range, it really is their needs differ by where they kind of fall on the spectrum, right? Like I work with people fresh out of college that are like that 22, 23. And then I've had people upwards of 45 and 50 in kind of the group setting. And it's really cool to see the dynamic there. I love when the 22-year-old like offers an insight that the 50-year-old might not have seen. And all of a sudden, like they're coaching each other and it's beautiful. But the fresher out of school, there's more of that, like, who am I? What am I without the sport kind of identity processing going on? Whereas on the older side of things, and I'm going to use that term lightly, like I don't think 50 is old by any stretch, but on the older side of the demographic that I work with, I think really it's just they know who they are. They're just looking for ways to continue to tap into that and continue to grow. They're a little bit further along the journey, but they still recognize that there's still growth ahead of them, which I that's how I sum up the athletic mindset in general, right? Is this growth idea of we can always improve somewhat.
Yeah. So what is there a certain like we tackled the demographic question. Is there anything specifically that your clients come to you wanting either on the physical side or the mental side? Do you see a commonality between what people are looking for?
Yeah, most people just want to trust themselves again and feel like confident in their day-to-day life and feel like they have that sense of purpose, that they're lit up every single day. From a physical standpoint, a lot of the people that have worked with me are, just looking to not get back into the shape that they were in when they were competing collegiately or professionally, but to get back into just the routine of moving their body again and like establishing that. And then the flip side, I've also had people that have come to me that I always say like they have the physical six pack, like they're absolutely shredded and ripped, and it's great. They need to work on the mental and spiritual six pack of like how can we get in shape into those areas.
That is hilarious. I love it. So,
I always think of like I think of like a brain with a six pack of abs. I'm like, that's what I want my people to walk away feeling like they're just so mentally disciplined and confident in their abilities that they quite literally have a brain with six pack. They feel
so
great.
do you work with a lot of former athletes who have like performance anxiety um or are you kind of working on mental skills more like anxiety reduction or mindfulness?
It's it's a tough question because it's a little bit of everything, right? Like it depends on the person because I think each person comes to me with they have an overarching like theme to it, but each person has like an area that they can improve on. I've dealt a lot with people with performance anxiety and how to, especially the people that struggled with it in their collegiate days or sport playing days, and now it's manifesting and carrying itself into these other areas. It's a really challenging thing to try to navigate. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think mindfulness is definitely a key piece. It's understanding that gap of like this event happened, like I can be very mindful if the gap exists between the event happening and the thought and an emotion being attached to the thought that comes with it. It's like how can we slow down and like stop that? And that's when more your like traditional practices of meditation and mindfulness and all that stuff comes into play. That's definitely a key piece of what I coach on.
So let's bring it back a couple steps. Can you
Yeah,
talk about your exit from swimming?
absolutely. So to kind of paint the picture there, my first 2 years at Delaware were really 3 years were absolutely phenomenal. I had never finished worse than fourth at the conference meet. I was team MVP twice. I always joke should have been a third time, but they gave it to a senior instead. I'm not bitter about it, I promise. Um, but up to that point, I had set 7 school records, like was doing really, really well. And then my senior year, we had a lot of just moving pieces. I finished my last ever race as a collegiate swimmer slower than I had been in high school, the worst place I had ever gotten. And it was over like that. And it took me a lot to process. I was fortunate. My dad was able to time that race. It was a mile. So I got out and like kind of gave him a hug of like, hey, thanks for everything for getting me into this, but definitely not the way that I wanted it to end. Um, and I held a lot of resentment for a while towards the coach that I had at the time. I was like, well, if he just trained me better, like, and it wasn't really until years later that I was able to take full responsibility of it. And I think that's really what it was I was trying to push blame and all this onto other people. And as I was doing that, I found myself really unhappy. I put on 40 pounds of what I thought was muscle, but then, after 8 months of being 40 pounds heavier, I looked in the mirror. I was like, all right, dude, you got to get this in order because this isn't like your bulking season's over. Like it's time to move again. I ran a mile for the first time then, and my knees hurt, joints ached. I was like, what is this? Like, this has never happened in my life before. And that was kind of my wake up call of like, all right, I need to get my own life in order and just go back to what makes sense for me. I was working a sales role at the time and was really just not loving it. So I quit the job. I was unemployed for 3 months, traveled the world in doing so. Went abroad like 3, 4 different times during that 3 month period, and then came back to become a summer swim coach. And at first it was like, man, this isn't successful. Like this isn't what success looks like. I have a job for 2 months out of the year and that's it. And then as I did it, I was like, but why am I thinking that way? Like, why can't this be successful? And I was able to turn that summer coaching job into a year round swim program that I was making six figures faster than I was in the sales role when I originally thought that the sales role was the only way that I would be able to make that kind of money. I grew up being understanding that swim coaches don't get paid. Like, there's no way that I can make a living. And I was like, well, I'm just going to do what I love and find ways to get really creative. And I love just playing in that space of, I said it before, like being curious about something and finding that passion and going back and forth there. So that was a short version of my journey out of the sport.
So then, how long, or is it still existing, were you kind of grappling with that athletic identity? I mean, this has been my life for so long, and now I'm never going to compete in the same capacity that I'm used to again.
I think it ebbs and flows, right? Like it comes in waves. Like there's definitely times where I've gone to a pool and have like I love going there to some laps on kind of my time, and like maybe sometimes feel like doing a set and I'm quickly reminded like I'm nowhere as fast as I used to be. And in those moments it's like, damn, like what would it really take for me to get back to that level? And I remember I'm like, there's no desire there for me to put in the 20 plus hours a week of swimming back and forth looking at a black line. I can now be at a place where I can go and use that as a great escape and mindfulness tool of my own, unique to me, that I know that works, but I don't need it every single day. I can find those same benefits in other things, and that's what I think really helps me when I'm in those lower points, is like identifying the core, the root of like why I did the stuff in the first place, and being super mindful and intentional of putting that into things that I'm already doing now. And that helps me like snap out of it pretty quick. I mean, not to say I won't get in a funk for a few days or a week at a time, but it's never extended by any stretch.
Yeah, I mean, when I was leaving soccer, it was really difficult because
Yeah.
like my club teammates were like going to D1 schools, and like I I had broken my collarbone, and the whole recruiting process was like not really happening. And so it was difficult, like what do I do now? And like that sentiment is echoed in so many different athletes all over the world. And so it's
Mm,
interesting to just see like how each of us processes that kind of breaking up with the sport that is all they've really known. I mean, if you play
yeah.
baseball, you're constantly going all over the country to tournaments. If you're a football player, you're going to showcases. And I mean, there's something for each of those individual sports that just takes up so much of your time. And it's like it's almost like a void when it's not there because it's just a routine that you're so used to.
Yeah, I always equate it to like it's like it was my first love. Like it was my first like romantic interest in that sense, right? Like from really 4 years old until 22 when I graduated, like swimming was always there. Like I could always turn to it. It was if I was having a bad day, like swim practice was there to pick me up and just escape from everything. Like they were my teammates played the role of like the soundboard that I could go to for support. And then sorry, there's an ambulance going by. Hopefully you can't hear it too loud.
It's fun.
But then on the flip side of things, it was like also when I was having a really good day, I looked forward to some practice. It excited me. I couldn't wait to spend time doing what I love to do. So yeah, when it's taken away from you, especially like in your case, when it's taken away because of an injury, like something, and that's super hard to process, right? That's a whole different kind of thing because for so long you were able to turn to your body and rely on it and count on it. And now all of a sudden, like your body's like kind of fighting back and saying, yo, you can't do this anymore. That's almost even harder to process and be like, okay, like I'm okay with that. And it's okay to not be okay with it. I think that that's a huge piece that we miss. Like I know when swimming stopped for me, I wanted to just like dive right into the next thing and just like forget about it and just be like, well, I was burnt out. Screw it. Like I'm done. And I really wish I took a little bit more time to just pause, process, and really sit with this question of who am I beyond this? Like, what am I actually as a person, as a human being? How did swimming represent that rather than define that? And I think there's a fine balance there of taking the time to process and still moving forward and not dwelling in the past. Because, I mean, we all know athletes, former athletes that really just love to relive the glory days of like, oh, I was really great. And they're not really doing anything moving forward. I help I've found a good balance and I try to help other people find that balance of like, let's face the past, but like let's also move forward at the same time and
So
juggle the two.
how does the mindset of the forever athlete play into the continuation of those that mindset and those goals?
Yeah, I'm sure as you know, like the words we use matter, right? So I think when we're talking athletic identity, I was getting so frustrated always referring to the people that I work with or myself as a former athlete because in my mind, when I hear former athlete, I envision packing up everything that was to show for my 18 plus year commitment to this thing into a shoebox and like putting it on the top shelf of my closet and like let it collect dust and never see it again. And I was like, well, yeah, I've been told like that's how I should move on from it, like put it away and like forget about it. But what if we don't? I think we were approaching it the wrong way for so long of like just sweep it under the rug, forget about it. What if we find ways to draw on it daily? And that's kind of what Forever Athlete stands for me is it's like this constant opportunity every single day to draw on something that I've practiced and mastered and, spent years and years and years cultivating to get to a certain point. It's why I'm like, I don't care what the physical challenge is. Like I'm gonna still try to push my body in different areas and find some new excitement. That's why running was so exciting for me because I had never really done it before. I wasn't allowed to. Weightlifting, the same thing. Like I was told I needed to be a super skinny distance swimmer. So what did I do when swimming first stopped? I bulked up and lifted heavy weights, and it felt awesome up to a point. I had to find that balance. Um, but forever athlete to me is just this constant growth of you can tap back into that identity. And I'm a firm believer that that's if you are an athlete, you're once an athlete, always an athlete, and that's a key part of your identity piece. Like you need to find ways to express that, and when you do, again, your life fulfillment and just your overall quality of life goes through the roof.
So what are some exercises that, for example, contact sport athletes can continue to do once they left their sport?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because
It's
it's not exactly like swimming or like running track where you still have those atmospheres that you can go to. I mean, you
yeah,
can't replicate a football field. You can't replicate a soccer field and the exact atmosphere of getting into that mindset. So, what can people who've left their sport do to kind of mimic that environment without actually being out there?
yeah, it's challenging. That's why it's funny. Like I relate to the Olympic sports, right? Because for most of those, you can just walk out your door and like go do. Like swimming, the only added step is like I have to find a body of water to go swim in, but it's not like I need to find, you know, 23 other guys to go play football with or baseball with, whatever that may look like. So I think it's just being intentional with seeking out opportunities that sort of replicate it. Again, it goes back to identifying like the core of why you were drawn to those sports in the first place. Like, believe it or not, even though swimming is an individual sport, like I was drawn from a community aspect of connecting with the teammates. And then I was also drawn to this. I think I'm a perfect balance of like extrovert and introvert. Like, it depends on the mood that I'm in. And swimming was perfect for that, right? Like I could talk to my teammates or I could put my head down in the water and just swim for an hour at a time. So it was that balance. And once I identified that, it's like, all right, my day to day, like I need to make sure that I have planned time where I'm connecting with people like yourself, and that's satisfying the extrovert part of me. And then I need time where I'm just by myself with my thoughts, no music, no nothing, like going for a walk, journaling, reading, whatever it may be, because that's filling my introvert cup. And it's that balance of the two. So I think once I identified that, and that's what I encourage people listening in that come from the contact sport background, especially like identify why you got into it. And then once you identify that, like how can you start to get creative and putting those same pieces into play into your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole introvert versus extrovert kind of sets you on a certain path toward a certain sport. I mean,
Yeah,
introverts tend to go to things like golf and tennis and the individual sports, whereas raging extroverts like myself tend to go toward team sports, and that's just how it is. I would for sure consider you more of an extrovert than an introvert, though.
I hide it well. I it's funny. I've had I've had a couple people, one person in particular over the weekend, she was like, "You're way more like mellow in person than I expected based off like what you put out on social media and podcasting and all this stuff." And I was like, yeah, like I just know when to like dial it on and dial it back. And it's this constant like balance of the two. I think I'm very easygoing, go with the flow. And swimming like really lent itself to that a lot of times. Like I loved distance because it was just like, all right, I messed up that turn, whatever. Like there's 65 other ones to get right after the fact. Whereas most other people are like, it's got to be perfect, perfect, perfect. I'm just like, let's let it ride. Let's see what goes on.
So let's talk about your podcast. I
Yeah,
see the banner behind you.
let's
So
dive
how
into
did
it.
you get into the podcasting space, and what does your podcast lend to listeners?
Yeah. So the Athletic Mindset podcast is the name of the show. And how I got into it is actually kind of by accident. I was a guest on a friend of mine who started a show, and I was a reoccurring guest on a couple episodes. And I had a few friends check it out. And, thankfully for them, they said, "Hey, Cory, we're just going to be brutally honest with you. The podcast that you keep coming on, it's not that great. But every time that you speak up and like add something, it's very thoughtful, introspective, and insightful. Like, have you ever thought about starting your own?" I was like, "What do you mean starting my own podcast? Like, what do I have to talk about every week? Like, no." And then I started to like really identify, like, well, I've always been fascinated by mindset and the mental edge. And I mean, dating back to early high school, like I was constantly trying to analyze the people that I was racing against, learn their behaviors, learn how they thought, and then use it to my advantage. Like I understood that when I would race certain people, like I needed to get out ahead of them early on so that they just lost complete confidence. And if I was able to hold that lead for long enough, like they'd actually just like give up. They wouldn't finish the race with willpower. And I was like, that's pretty cool to understand. Like, I'm going to start talking about this stuff. And then I also realized, like, I loved having deep conversations with people like yourself that have a unique perspective and a unique skill set that I would love to learn from. So, why not blend the two together, sit down and have conversations around mental performance, mindset, how you live your life, whatever it equates to, and then put that out there and share with the world. It really started selfishly of like I just wanted an excuse to learn from really cool people, and now it's like exploded into something way bigger than I ever thought it would, and I'm just really really grateful and honestly proud that I listened to that curiosity and just went for it. We're almost at 100 episodes, which is insane.
That's amazing. So, who is the coolest episode that you've had? Or if
That's
there's not a
such a
certain person, is there a certain topic that you have found most intriguing?
ooh, I'll answer both of those. I
Okay.
think most unique mindset and person that I've had on so far is this guy Hunter McIntyre, who is like an insane obstacle course racer. He is the world record holder in high rocks, which I'm going to compete in 2 weeks down in Austin. I'm not competing in the same division as him. He is like in the pro stuff. I'm just in the amateur. Like let's give this a go and see how it goes. Maybe one of these days I'll give him a run for his money. But he's an absolute animal. But he was really fascinating because like similar to me, like he took the marathon training for example and went from I went like 2 months, like let's run a marathon. He did 7 days, let's run a marathon, and went sub 3 hours, qualified for Boston in it. And he did it in like extreme weather conditions of Utah, like under 30 degrees at the start, like icy rain, and he's just an absolute animal. So he was my favorite, I think, to sit down with and just kind of break apart like where did this mindset come from? And he's just got a crazy addictive personality towards like competing and growing. And I think that is also the topic that I love diving into is I think a lot of times athletes we have hyper addictive traits about us, and it's like how do we make sure we're applying that superpower that could set us up for success athletically into the right things, especially in life post sport, because unfortunately athletes in particular are like way more prone to becoming alcoholics or drug addicts and all this other stuff. And interesting enough, Hunter's story, like he came the opposite way. Like he was he was literally a heroin addict, and then now is this world record holder, like badass dude. And it was just because he was able to shift like what he was putting that hyper focus into. And he became more addicted to the feeling here rather than the feeling that drugs gave him, which is, I think, a huge lesson for people.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah. He's a
Which episode was
wild
that?
dude. Uh, I have no idea what number it is
I'll look it up.
off the top of my head.
So has there ever been a client that you've worked with where you can really see them taking your advice, putting it into play and benefiting from it? I mean, has there ever been like a light bulb moment with your clients?
Yeah. I mean, there's been plenty. The one that most recently comes to mind, someone that I'm actually currently working with. Um, she does hopefully doesn't mind me sharing this. We've talked at length about it, but she has a hyperthyroid issue where, for those of you not familiar, like your thyroid controls a lot of your hormonal reactions, which in turn, manifests itself in weight gain and all this other stuff. So when her and I first started working together, she was coming off of this diagnosis. It was at an okay level. I think she had gotten her thyroid tested. It was at about an 8 or a 9 in the fall. She got put on medication. She was down to around like a 2. We started working together, and she was absolutely crushing it, like being super consistent with workouts, all this stuff. And then about about 2 months into working together, she kind of has this breakdown of like she had put on 2 pounds, and she was frustrated because like she put on weight when she's been working out way more than she ever has in recent memory. And she was like, I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand like what's happening. Like, and it wasn't until actually we talked through the mindset stuff of like, hey, let's focus on some other metrics. Like, it's not all about the scale. Like, let's look at your quality of sleep. Like, let's look at your energy levels, your hormone levels, all this stuff. Well, ironically enough, she got blood work done 2 days later, and her doctor informed her that her thyroid was at a 42, which was like normal thyroid's supposed to be at a 1, and it's 42 times like normal. And she was like, this is absolutely insane. 2 days ago, I was like worried and upset over 2 pounds. Now I'm finding out that because of all the work that we've done, it's only been 2 pounds. Like, that's freaking amazing. Like, my hormones have been all out of whack, and somehow I've felt pretty much normal. Like, the mood swings and everything has been relatively stable compared to like what it should be with a thyroid like that out of uh alignment of quote unquote normal. And I think that was super cool just to hear her send me a voice note and say like, I only put on 2 pounds 2 days later, after we were just talking about like her freaking out over putting on 2 pounds. It's like, that's a huge mindset shift. And obviously like great for her mental health, great for her emotional health, and great for her physical health too. Of like, we were I'm a firm believer like the work that I do doesn't mean bad stuff won't happen to you. I'm a prime example of it. Like, bad stuff happens to me all the time. My car still gets towed. I get parking tickets, like stuff gets stolen from me, like all this stuff. But like, the benefit of doing this kind of work is you are able to snap out of those things way faster than most people. You don't dwell on them and let it be. You don't let those emotions control you and consume you and run your whole day or run your whole week. You're able to get back in the driver's seat a lot quicker.
And do you think that that is just consistent with competition, or do you think that that is instilled in high level athletes?
Which, the ability to like get back at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think it is both. I think like any skill, right? Like, it's introduced to you early on in whatever sport that you're playing, if we're talking about that context, but it's not really until later years and highly competitive and collegiate or onwards that it's more so like you've mastered that skill. And if you haven't, like, your performance is showing. Like, I always say for swimming, like, it didn't matter what kind of performance that I had. I allowed myself the 5 to 10 minute window of cooling down after a race to feel all the emotions that I needed to feel for that race. That was the outlet. It was like, if I was upset, I could be as upset as I wanted to be in the warm down pool. But the moment that I popped out to grab my towel and like go back to the team area, it needed to be next race. Or if I was done swimming for the day, it needed to be, how can I be the ultimate teammate for my people around me that still have to compete? Because I know if I go back with this low energy of like, damn, it really didn't go my way, like that sucked, people are going to feed off of that and they're not going to be set up to go perform well. Um, so yeah, I think I didn't really put that into practice and become aware of it though until later years. I think it was something that I was always trying to do growing up, but I wasn't super mindful of it and intentional about it until later when I realized like, oh, these mental skills are like something we can actually train, and we should put time and effort towards, like, and it's gonna make a difference. Okay, great, I'm sold. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're talking about almost like switching light bulb on and off of the flow
Yeah.
state, that is something that no one really teaches you how to do. but sports puts you in that scenario where you're having to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it, right? Is like it was this playground for so many of us, like quite literally. I always, I when we're talking about like finding purpose and passion again for people in life post sport, like I always am like, think back to that feeling of like when you first found soccer, when I first found swimming, like how freaking fun it was. Like all these cool activities, like some of my best memories of swimming aren't winning a conference meet. Like I'm proud of that, but like what really lights me up and gets me excited is the minis to midnight where we were chilling at the pool until midnight and you're 8 years old and you're watching a movie after going down water slides all night. And you're like, this is so freaking cool. Like my parents are letting me stay up until midnight and I'm with my friends. This is amazing. And I'm like, how can I bring that same energy into everything that I'm doing now? Like we hear it all the time, right? Of like, when did we stop playing? Like, why did we have to grow up, so to speak? And I think we can tap back into that inner child piece a lot and still be serious and like get stuff done. But like flow state's the perfect example of it. Flow state won't come if we're super structured and rigid of like, I need to be in flow state now. Like robot, like let's perform and focus. Like there's gotta be that challenge skill sweet spot and find that, but also that it's gotta feel light and easy. I mean, you probably know it from your playing days of like if you went into the game all stiff, you probably weren't going to play very well. But if you went into the game like, cool, like, let's see how we're going to play today. Like I'm super excited to play. Odds are you probably got into flow a little bit faster that way.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask you about plan rigidity.
Yeah.
So, putting together either a workout plan or a plan for success in your job or your life or a weight loss plan, how can you implement structure while also making it fun and enjoyable? The process, I mean.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think it's something we're all trying
And
to figure out.
I'll add a little addendum as well. In the event that you are too rigid, are you doomed to fail?
I don't know if you'd be doomed to fail, but I think you're leaving something on the table unturned. Like you're leaving something there that could really be the key to success beyond what you even imagined. Like how many times have you like gone into something and like you were just blown away, like you had one expectation, but when you went in with flow and then all of a sudden you were like, whoa, I never in my life thought I would be able to do this and it happened. Like to me that happened all the time when I was finding flow state in swimming. Like I talked about my first 2 years at Delaware, it quite literally was every time I hit the pool at the conference meet, it wasn't just a best time by like a few tenths of a second. Like I was dropping 5 to 10 to like 15 seconds in events and like coming out of nowhere of being like, oh, like who is this guy to, oh crap, like this guy is like competing to win at like a really early age in his collegiate career. Like what is happening? And I think it really comes from it's got to be a blend, right? Of you have to have the confidence to obviously be like, I belong here and do this. Talking about that challenge skill sweet spot. Like if your skill set is not quite there and like all of a sudden the challenge is way beyond your current skill set, like you're gonna feel unmotivated and discouraged. So your rigidity and regimen and routine and all that, I think needs to prepare you enough so that the skill part is honed in practice. But it can't I I feel at the same time, like if you're over skilled and that challenge doesn't meet that level, you're gonna just be like, all right, like cool, like whatever, I won. Like this is I did master swimming a year and a half out of school and first race back since college. I set the Virginia state record, became a Masters All American, and like absolutely dominated the events that I was doing. But I was not excited about it. That's when I knew I had a real problem. I was like, I thought I wanted this again. I didn't at all. And it was because that challenge didn't really meet where my skill set was at. So I think finding a plan that allows you to develop the skills, and then finding challenges that meet you where you're at is part of that process. And you really need to find that balance of my plan is going to look totally different than someone else's plan because my skill set is maybe at a different part of that continuum than someone else. The running is the perfect example of that. Like, yes, I hadn't really run anything, but I had an 18-year like distance swimming endurance sport background base that I was building off of. So it's way easier for me to say, okay, in 2 months, I'm going to go, or shoot, I could probably do it in a month even. It wouldn't be pretty, but like it could get done versus someone who doesn't have that skill set baseline foundation. Like they have to be a little bit more realistic. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
yeah, it
Okay.
does. So how do you tell a youth athlete or explain to them the difference between playing to enjoy the sport and playing to win? And at
Mm.
what point in your athletic career does it transition to playing to win?
That's a good question. I don't think it should ever turn. Like I think it should be a both, right? Like obviously it's more fun when you win. I would be lying if I thought otherwise and felt otherwise, but that was always I coached for 8 years in swimming, and that was actually always my last piece of advice to anyone I coached before they went to go for the race. So go out there and have fun. And they would at first it was like they would look at me like you're kidding me, right? Like this is the championship meet. Like that's your advice. Like go out and have fun. And I'm like, swimming is lends itself perfectly, right? Like there's so many pieces to a stroke. Freestyle, for example. Like your toes have to be pointed, your kick tempo has to be a certain way, your body position has to be this in the water, your head position is X. Like, what do you do? How are you pulling water? If we shift our focus into like that needs to be perfect at that last minute, we're setting ourselves up to failure because we're not allowed, we're too much into this like thinking from our head versus just playing from our heart. And I think when we're able to play from our heart, that's we're able to have more fun, and we're able to when we're having more fun, we're able to do harder things with little less effort, which is kind of what flow state is, right? Like we're able to tap into some reserves that we had no idea, and in turn doing so, you're more likely to win. It's literally that simple, but I think we lose sight as we get a little bit more competitive, higher up in the ranks of whatever sport it is. Like we try to flip that formula on its head and be like, well, we need to win. And like fun is like an afterthought. But I think if you can keep that formula the same, who knows? I think a lot would change.
Yeah, I think that the second that you play to win, you're extrinsically motivated, and extrinsic motivation doesn't last.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the
It's great in
second
spurts.
that you start to lose, you also lose your competitive edge because you're not in it for your enjoyment any longer.
Yeah. It's like the people that visualize their performance is like only going perfect, which is like good, great. Like I'm all for visualization, but you shouldn't always visualize just one scenario. Like if I visualized the mile being like I dove in and from start to finish I led for the 15 minutes that that race was, I'd be setting myself up for some unrealistic expectations going into race day because very rarely was it like start to finish every single second I was leading. Like I had to start playing around with some other things. And yeah, if you don't have that intrinsic motivation to dig deep and really just focus on yourself, I think is huge. It's really hard in sport to just say like, okay, like what can I do to play the best that I can right now and still try to beat some other people in that process. Ironically, you beat more people when you are able to just tune them out and just like focus exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that going along with the visualization, if you can't visualize yourself coming back
Yeah.
from being behind, you're also doing yourself a disservice. because the point of visualization is to work through every possible scenario that could go right or could go wrong.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I had I'm laughing. The one I had a race one time where I was in high school and I was actually race. It was over the summer, and I found myself in the A final at this 400 free race back home, and I was racing a bunch of college swimmers. I'm getting up and I'm like getting a little nervous going up. I mean, these guys are like twice my size at this point, and I'm just like, all right, here I am, this little junior in high school. I'm going to go race them and give them my best. And I go to tie my suit, and if you're not familiar with swimming, like these suits are like they're supposed to be super tight, they're super expensive, and they take forever to get freaking on and off. I go to tie my suit, and the string just snaps. And I'm like, oh crap! I have 5 minutes until like my race. I can't tie my suit. I don't have enough time to like go get out of the suit and put on another one. Like, what am I gonna do? And I went, and it wasn't a great race at all. But after that moment, I was like, all right, you will never catch me not visualizing like any scenario. And it doesn't mean like you live into that um like what could go wrong all the time. You're becoming familiar with it so that if and when it does happen, because it will at some point, you're more prepared to like plan accordingly and like go from there. It's not you're doing yourself a disservice by not looking at those kind of scenarios.
Yeah, I love talking about visualization because when, I mean, it's different than imagery. You know,
Yeah.
like imagery, you are imagining being out on the field and you're smelling the popcorn or you're hearing the crowds cheer. But visualization goes much deeper than that. And there are a lot of different ways that you can channel that visualization. I mean, like you and I were
Mm.
just talking about, it can be really positive, or it can be what is the smallest thing that could possibly throw my success off, and let's work through that.
Yeah. I love that piece that you added there. Like, let's work through that because some people who struggle with mental performance, they are great at identifying the smallest little thing that could throw off their performance, but they live in that space and they're constantly in this state of worry and anxiety. That's where performance anxiety really stems from. Is like they're living in the space of like what could go wrong. Something's going to go wrong instead of okay, something could go wrong, but how can I respond? How can I be proactive here rather than being reactive? That race was the perfect example. Like I was not prepared and I was super reactive and my performance showed. Like I was just worried about keeping my suit up over my waist than like going to swim a best time and compete against some people that would have been really good practice for me to go and compete against. Um, so yeah.
That's incredible. So how did you fine tune this mindset that you're teaching other people about?
I think I'm still fine tuning it. And that's what makes it so fun is it's something that I've been able to build a business, a brand around me, like something that I'm doing anyway. And that's why I'm able to show up the way that I'm able to show up when I want to, because it's authentically me. So it's just being intentional with making sure that I am putting what I like preach and teach into practice, into motion myself every single day. Like movement is a key foundational cornerstone of my day. Like it's not like, and it can look different, right? Like today is a super swamped, busy day for me, and I'm grateful for that. It means I can't get my quote unquote normal Monday workout in that I normally would, but I have similar to visualization, right? Like I have that plan B in place of like, okay, in the perfect world, I could get this 2 hour workout in and absolutely like be on this high. And I love it. But reality is more, okay, I'm going to get 30 minutes in today and I'm just going to change it up. And that's cool too. It's still moving me towards that destination that I want to go towards. Um, but I'm not letting external things come at me and like throw me off from where I'm actually going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, and I do think that we've kind of skirted around this word, but being adaptable is a huge part
Yeah.
of the athlete mindset, and then just the success driven mindset following sport.
Yeah, I mean, for every successful person, I guarantee you there's a zillion failures behind that success. Like you hear it time and time again of like people that have launched companies that didn't work out before they started Amazon or Microsoft or Apple or what we know them now as. So, and sports the perfect way. Like I lost a zillion times the amount of races that I won. Um, but that doesn't mean like I wasn't a good athlete. And that doesn't mean like I can't be a good human and person now as I adopt this forever athlete mentality. It's like, it's just going with the flow, being adaptable, making the most of your scenario and environment, and going with it from there. You're just kind of playing the cards you're dealt, but in a way that serves you and benefits you the most.
And that concludes the questions that I had to ask you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that you didn't think that we had talked about, or anything that you want to kind of plug at the end?
The one thing I would say, I have a free 9 day coaching strategies and exercises on my website right now. It's called Your Life Scorecard. It's a 9 day life assessment slash baseline test that I work with everyone through. And then I provide 9 free days of pre recorded coaching strategies to help improve wherever you land on that baseline test from there. So you could go, I encourage people listening to go check it out. It's just www.corycamp.com and they can get their free copy. And if, whatever I talked about today sounds interesting to you, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram at Cory Camp, and I'd be happy to connect and learn more about your unique situation. If there's anything I can do to help out.
Yeah, I'll put the link to your website and that course down in the show notes of this episode when it's published.
Beautiful. I appreciate you. This is so much fun.
I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I mean, I think that we talked about a lot of mental skills, which is why I wanted to start this podcast. I mean, I think that everyone has a story, and everyone's relationship with the intersection of sport and mental health is very different. Like the
Yeah.
episode that it's coming out in 2 days is about a Native American man who escaped reservation life and poverty through distance running.
I love
And
that.
it's an amazing episode. I'm so excited to publish it. And I mean, I've been able to tell so many different stories of people who are battling eating disorders or who are working through athlete identity issues.
Yeah.
And like, they're so willing to tell their stories. And it doesn't even have to be like, I have performance anxiety. It's the role that sport has played in my entire existence. You know,
Hmm.
like, how has what I've learned from sport impacted my life outside of it?
Yeah. I think that's such a needed piece. Like there's some components of my podcast as well that really dives into that, which is, it's just super fun conversation to hear. And I mean, that's why I love what I do, is because I'm able to kind of get paid to play around and explore those things. Like I learn as much from my clients as they learn from me. And it's a beautiful thing. I think we are all better together when we're having that kind of relationship going.
Yeah, I think that as much as they are the client and there is some kind of unspoken hierarchy in that regard,
Yeah.
you're still learning from them. You know, and I
Yeah.
think that the second that you or anyone in your position allows themselves to think that they are holier than thou and that they're teaching and that they're preaching
Yeah.
is the second that they kind of lose credibility.
Yeah, and I think I mean that's huge. Like every time I find myself surrounded in an environment that I'm like, I'm not learning, I'm not being stimulated, and I feel like I am coming from that place, I know it's time to mix things up. Whether that is a complete move to the opposite side of the country, or, like changing up who I'm spending my time with, and, you know, my inner circle of people. Uh, I'm always trying to kind of, and the podcast is a great way to do it, of just like rub elbows and get in with some really cool people that otherwise might not really be a connection or be in your network. That's the beauty of the podcast, right? Is it's this platform where you're like, hey, do you want to come talk about yourself for an hour? And people are gonna be like, yeah, sure. Like, that's cool. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I think that just the act of getting people on my podcast has been far easier than I anticipated because everyone is willing to tell their story.
Yeah.
I think that that's so cool as well because when you're talking about broadcast, some people aren't good on camera or they're nervous about the way that they stand or the way that they present or maybe how their
Yeah.
voice sounds. And then you say, okay, well, this is a platform where we're taking all of the video away. So you're just going to talk. And I have these questions for you, and all you have to do is answer them. People are so willing to just sit down for an hour and 6 minutes and just talk about their journeys. And I think that that's so cool.
Yeah. And it also helps that like the questions you ask are not simple, like yes or no. Or like, how did you feel during this? It's like, oh, I
Ugh,
felt sad, or you know what I mean?
I hate these questions. I actually had an episode where I talked with one of my college friends, my college journalism friends, about the questions that sport journalists ask athletes, for
Yeah.
example, in silent interviews and post game interviews, and how we could really diversify those questions and get far superior answers than the game was great.
Yeah.
I had a great
Did you
time. It was
expect to do
fun.
this?
Like
How'd you
telling a
win?
sideline reporter that you had a good time after you just won the championship
Yeah.
does nothing for the story.
God is great. Like we I wouldn't be here without him, and like all these
Yeah.
other things. Like, yeah, no, I'm with you. I was joking with a client of mine this morning, Zach Wilson, who just got drafted by the Jets.
Yeah,
W-
awesome.
A story came out where he was like, the headline was basically like, starting position will have to be earned, not given. And I was like, yeah, that's never been said before about like a high draft pick quarterback. Like, come on, ESPN, like let's get something a little bit more interesting. But that's what I think what's cool about the way that you conduct this. And I try to do something similar through my line of questioning, is like, I don't want the person that I'm talking to just go into interview mode of like, and you know exactly what interview mode is, for especially coming from former athletes or current athletes. They just go into that sideline reporter
Right.
mode of like, well, PR told me I can only say these things, so this is what I'm going to say.
Yeah, and that's why I think that doing a pre-interview is so important
Yeah.
because there can be a lot of awkward silence between you and I had we never talked before this. I mean, I used
Yeah.
to pre-interview as not only an additional background information session,
Yeah.
but I kind of use it to brainstorm how the actual interview is going to go and vet my questions. I mean, if there was anything, we're here right now, but had there been anything that you felt uncomfortable with me asking, I would have brought it up in the pre interview and said, are you good with like if we go on this tangent down this road? And
Yeah.
you could say, I would rather not. Or you could say, sure, like I'm totally good to talk about that. And I think that as a journalist, you have to have these conversations because they're giving you their reputation
Yeah.
and you have to treat it with respect.
No,
And at the same
exactly.
time, like you have your reputation as well. So you don't want to put out terrible content that makes you as the interviewer sound terrible and your guests sound like you're overstepping your bounds.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. It's again, it's another one of those balancing acts of like, how can you ask the questions that you're going to get like very unique answers, and how can you uh, make sure you're still kind of like being mindful of how you're portraying them and all that, so to speak. It's a fun challenge to have. I mean, that's something I'm still learning with even 100 episodes in now of like talking to people. It's like, all right, how can I get a little bit more out of these people so it's not the same kind of conversation time and time again. Talk about going in rigid, right? Like, I used to be super prepped with questions. Now I just go in with like, I honestly just read someone's background like right before, and I'm like, all right, let's roll, and it
Let's do
becomes
this.
more of this just back and forth convo,
Yeah,
which
I mean,
I love so much more.
I'll go into the pre-interview with about 10-ish questions for them, and
Yeah,
then I'll add some questions or I'll take some away depending on how the pre-interview goes, and then I'll make a couple, like I normally have 3 little focus blurbs that I'll say, okay, judging by how the pre-interview went, this is how we'll conduct, like things that we'll focus on in the actual interview, and then we'll just go from there. And sometimes, like as we're doing the interview, I'll think of other questions, and of course I don't, sometimes I don't even use all 10, sometimes I only use 5, and then we go on some amazing
yeah,
tangent that brings us down a totally different direction. And I
which
think
is
that
super
as a
cool.
journalist, the second that you go in trying to make the conversation go a certain way, you're losing. It's not going to
Yeah,
turn out well.
unless you get really good at being able to direct the conversation, which I think you'll find.
Eh,
You don't think?
it's still, I mean, the fact that your guest is participating means that they need to lead the interview.
Yeah, I'd be
Like unless
curious.
your guest is not very extroverted and you're kind of trying to coax answers out of them, then I think it's different. But if you see that there's a certain way that your guest wants to talk
Yeah.
and you're like, no, we're not going that way, we're going to go over here to the questions that I have, I don't think
Uh,
that that's the right way to conduct an interview.
yeah. I meant it as like understanding where they are going with things and like still finding ways to like weave in like what you were talking about
Oh
that
yeah,
fit
yeah.
kind of where they're going.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that perfecting that is like,
it's a challenge.
yeah, it's difficult.
It's that's one of my favorite parts about it though, because that's like if you can kind of lead, like I understand where I want the podcast to go, and like it's almost the conversation becomes this game of like, well, they've took me way over here, and like we have to somehow get back over to this point. At I don't know when and how it's gonna happen, but like we're gonna try and navigate it.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes like super organic for someone to plug whatever they're plugging or something like that. Like I always ask ahead of time, similar to you, like, all right, so like, what do you wish to plug, or is there anything we have to hit on from like a PR business standpoint? And
Right.
that's a huge help. People are like, oh yeah, like this. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll like do a
Yeah,
little research on like
I
what that
asked that at
is.
the end
Yeah, perfect.
because I normally, like I have my questions obviously, and then I always ask the catch-all, like, is there anything else that you want to talk about? Because sometimes that ends up in 15 minutes more of conversation that I didn't even expect, and
Yeah,
sometimes that's where some of my favorite quotes have come from.
yeah, cause
It's just different every time.
yeah, which is the beauty of it. How are you on getting like guests and stuff? You said
Oh,
you're fine with
perfect. Like
people.
it's so, like I was saying earlier, everyone is so willing to tell their story. I've
Yeah,
sent the majority of my contacts have been through like Instagram direct message, like, hey, I heard
yeah,
your story on a podcast, or ESPN had your story up here, or the Players Tribune, you wrote an article for the Players Tribune that I really loved, or something like that. I mean, like I've seen their story elsewhere, so I know that they're comfortable in telling it. And now
yeah,
it's like, okay, well, come tell it on my platform.
yeah. I love that.
And so
That's good.
it already breaks the barrier. Like they're comfortable in telling their story to someone else. Now just tell it
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. I like that. I just always ask. I'm more than happy to help introduce people. So if there's anyone that I've had that you're like, I I would love to have them, let me know and I
Yeah.
can make that intro. Because
Same for
sometimes,
me. I mean,
yeah,
I have
appreciate that.
this week is 15, episode 15.
I I had to have a 15th episode to get here too. So
Everyone had to have a 15th episode to get to
yeah,
100, to get to 1,000.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
they're
It's
building blocks, and it's been so much fun up to this point, and like I feel like I've been doing it for way longer than 15 weeks.
Yeah, it's super cool to look back. Like I look back on my first episode, and what's even cooler is like the two guys I live with have listened since the beginning, and they're like, "Dude, it's like way better now." like you've progressed like so much. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, like, this is so cool. So it's cool to see. Do you need anything from me on my end of things?
Um, if I mean, like, I'm going to link your course. Um, I'm on your newsletter. Is there a way that like they can click something that can get them on your newsletter?
Yeah. So the course would sign them up to the
Okay.
newsletter as well.
Okay. And then is there anything else that you wanted me to link at any point?
No, not really.
Okay.
Other than like Instagram or like social media
Yeah.
stuff, but that's really about it. I appreciate it.
And then I think that'll conclude our interview. And then I'll DM you when this goes up. I think it will
Perfect.
either be 2 weeks from now or next week, depending on how the interview that I'm doing tomorrow goes.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I appreciate it, Julia.
All
Enjoy
right.
the rest of your week here.
You too.
Thanks. I'll talk to
I
you
hope you
soon.
don't get too stressed out from the rest of today.
No, it's okay. I don't know if you can tell. My
I
office
was
is
wondering where
outside.
you were. It looked like you were outside.
Yeah, my
Are you in a
office is
tent?
outside. No, I'm on my front porch. So like this is
Oh,
our
wow.
yard and stuff. So I try to take my meetings and stuff out here, and this headset is really good at. I know I said something about an ambulance going by at some
Yeah.
point. I don't even know if you could have heard it on your end of things. So maybe you did, but very faintly.
Yeah, it wasn't loud. I mean, did it go like right by?
It was literally like 10 feet away from me on the street. So like it's amazing how great this headset is
And I
of
love
like
that you
picking
have
up
your
me.
banner behind you.
It's a built-in Zoom background. It's perfect. But not Zoom background. I just have to make sure I record in front of this.
Yeah.
But I
So,
appreciate you.
yeah, thank
Enjoy
you
your
for coming
Monday.
on.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Sounds good. Bye.